My name is Maurice Guibord, and I am the director of the Société historique Francophone de la Colombie-Britannique, which is based out of the Francophone Center in Vancouver on the traditional and unceded lands of the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam peoples. My family, 350 years ago, came from central France, and we were based out of Trois-Rivières in New France. And I'm from Ottawa, though, and have been in BC for the last 42 years now. The Société Historique's mandate is provincial, and it is to gather the history of Francophones in the province. So what's the province's name? British Columbia, right? So we're lucky if any historical book in BC has a paragraph on us, which is why we have a huge book, library. But this is where we get our gems, and then talking to people and their families as well. And this is what I did for this particular project, okay? So I kept finding, families that were Francophone families that were involved in ranching, and then we started, it's the royal we, okay? We started doing this research, and in 2019, we received a grant from Digital Museums Canada, who had seen the product of the research, and they said, you have to do a digital museum for us and with us for our website in both French and English. A digital exhibition is basically an exhibition like this, but it's online, right? And which we did. But to do that, that's when I really went into doing oral history interviews in this particular region with the Patenaudes, the Isnardys, with the Minnaberriets, the Pigeons, the Guichons, etc. So it was enriching, but I never knew until I was there where it would take me. It was full of get out of here moments, in a good way. Okay. COVID came along, we had to stop, so it lengthened the process, but here we are, and I'm really thrilled to be able to present this. So Jean Barman, who most of you will know, who's doing so health-wise, by the way, right now, which is too bad, but she had done the first book called, it's called French Canadians, Furs, and Indigenous Women in the Making of the Pacific Northwest. Long book, very academic title, but really a book aimed at everybody, right? So it's very, very good reading. If you want to read something good on French Canadians arriving in the fur trade and the women who kept them alive, basically, I'll tell you about that book. So she came and did a lot of the original research, and she's a good friend of the Société. And I said, Jean, what can I expect when I get out there? And she smiled and she said, you'll see. I thought, good for you. I'll develop my own approaches, etc. And what she had done was the original research on the original families, whereas I, over and above that, developing that further, I was talking to the descendants to find out how each of these families contributed to the making of the province afterwards. Okay, so that was really exciting. And the people I was speaking to were thrilled about that as well. So most of my families ended up with either a Métis lifestyle or a First Nations lifestyle, and all of them that I spoke to directly have asked me to tell their stories. All right, this is not cultural appropriation. This is like they were tickled when I got into each of their kitchens, and they already had 2 to 3 bankers' boxes of material waiting for me. And I thought, yes, this is what it's all about. And I asked some of them, I said, how come you have this? And some of them were saying, well, that's to help us get our Métis status. Well, that's a whole other story now, as we know, right? That's changed dramatically. And several of them every year will see us at our stands at Festival du Bois and the Francophone festivals in Nanaimo, Prince George, etc. And they say, well, can you help us get our status? And that's when I direct them to a lady who's still in Williams Lake here who does this. So it's kind of interesting that even Anglophone Métis will come to our Francophone society to say, can you help us out? Well, we do what we can, right? Like that's part of it, right? And because my families are Francophones, that's part of what we have to do. That's what, and it's exciting to be part of that process. So basically, and you will see, so down here is where Vancouver is. So basically I went up here. I can't see. Yes, so I went up here and married, did some research there, then went to Kelowna and did 3 families here, and then over to Spencer's Bridge, another family, all the way up here, Clinton, another family, and all the way to Williams Lake up here, and that's 3 more families. So that's... And as we go, we realize there's more families than I can actually do in a digital exhibition. As exciting as it was to have that possibility, that opportunity, it was very limiting in that you could only have so many pages in a digital exhibition. So I have 8 families, and even though I have this much material on some of the families, I could only offer them 3 pages each. So what does that mean? That means there's a book coming. Right? Because thanks to going out with Jolene Cumming, who's here today, we explored numerous other families, former ranches around Mammoth Lake, for example. None of them are in this family. There's the Christians in Christian Valley, and so on and so on. So there's going to be even more stuff. My board is a little tired of hearing me talking about Francophone ranchers, but I think there's a couple more years left. Let's see now. So I have to stress that the history of ranchers and ranches in the province is totally one of colonialism, of the establishment of businesses and industries, then villages and towns on lands outright appropriated from the First Nations right then and there. We have to understand that. You will see, though, how the Indigenous members of the families that I visited made their place either then or more recently in the historical fabric of the province. And that was exciting to see and explore with them. So let's get started. Of course, so these are my families. Boucherie, which no longer exists, the family. Guichon or Guichon, Isnardy or Isnardy, Lequime or Lequime, and they no longer have descendants. Minnaberriet, which is not Minnaberriet, Patenaude or Patenaude, Pigeon or Pigeon, Versepuech or Versepuech, and Gaspard or Gaspar. So, the Turcoden loved it, still love it. What's not to love? It's just a grand area to travel in. So given the time, which is only, I have 3 hours to speak to you today, we're only going to deal with 4 of the families shortly, okay? And then I've got the sheet at the back with the link to the exhibition, so you can go and find that exhibition and find out more for yourselves. So Amédée Isnardy is the first gentleman, and he's from Nice, so you've got France on the lower left there. And Nice is the French Riviera, right beside Monaco. Let's see now. So he, like all of the other men in my except for one, they all went first to the California Gold Rush, and that was 1848 to 1858. 10 years for a gold rush, that's a lot of gold, right? And they stayed there until it was pretty much gone. And then about 60,000 men from around the world went to that gold rush that established, of course, the city of San Francisco, right? And of those, 30,000 came directly to our first gold rush, 1858, and that was the Fraser Valley, the Fraser River, and then followed shortly thereafter by the Caribou and 6 other smaller ones. So he came from Nice, and let's see now. All of our gold rushes have been much shorter than that. So we had in 4 months, 40,000 men arriving in 1858 at Victoria, because that's where they had to get their permits and their team, their equipment. And that's when the walls of Fort Victoria came down, and it became the town of Victoria, which was 65% Francophone at that point, right? So then they all did what they were supposed to do: try to find gold. Now, like most of the men in this human wave, Amédée He married a native woman, a First Nations woman, Julienne Wailamalqua, whose father was chief of the Stadtleum nation, or as we have known it, Pemberton or Lillooet Lake or Lillooet. No photo exists of either one of them. Not too many photos, less photos of First Nations women as well. We know, there was this fear of losing one's soul, etc. But in this particular case, at least we know both the First Nations name, the original name, and the baptism name of Julienne Wailamalqua. And that's maybe because she was the daughter of a chief, but we do know from the ranchers' families that several times, they were on their way literally almost at the altar to be married, and the priest would say, I have to baptize you first. And then they would give the name in the language of usually the spouse. But we're lucky in this particular case, the record also gives her First Nations name. So in that respect, that was very cool. The couple had 11 children. Who's had 11 children here? No? And they established their ranch at Chimney Creek on the Fraser, southeast of Williams Lake. We know that French was not spoken at the home, but that the English spoke English, as well as a bit of Shuswap. So what happened to the French language? Most of my ranchers say they were getting into the British mold. That's what you had to do, right? But what about the children of mixed ancestry? The term métis comes from the French. Métis is the term we have for the descendants of a mixed couple, right? But Métis did not exist as a term back in the 1860s, 70s. So that terrible term, which I hate, the half-breed, would have been assignated to them. But again, my families are telling me that and you think a little bit of the blacks in the States, same thing, if you had a lighter skin, you could pass for white. So sometimes the families would give their whitish children, their lighter skinned children, to friends or family in the village or the town. But again, some of the families are telling me, when grandma at the home outside the town would see the dust cloud of the truck coming in to pick up the kids for a residential school, she would take the kids and run into the forest for 2 days, right? That's the harsh reality. So yeah, you not only needed to anglicize yourself, but in some certain families, you also felt that you had to bleach yourself, which is sad. So one of their sons was Jimmy Isnardy. Now, these are most of the kids from the second Isnardy marriage. My contact was at the extreme right here. And in this family, even though this is what I would term a Métis family, half the family says, no, we're European, we're white, right? They don't want to have anything to do with that, which is kind of fascinating to me. But that's the reality of that family and others as well. Now, there's my contacts on the left, Frank and Heather Isnardy, in the area that now bears their name, Isnardy, which is just southwest of here, the region called Isnardy. Frank died just a couple of years ago, and Heather had already left the household at that point, and I don't know where she is. Now, Frank's father was Jimmy, seated in the middle with his second wife, and there he is on the right as well. He became a champion fiddler for BC. Interesting, that European instrument was really was the link between cultures, right? We see that often in the cultures there. So good a fiddler that he has been recorded at the Royal BC archives. There is a great recording of him playing the fiddle and giving an interview in his older years. Now, many of my families, war heroes were not uncommon. My families tell me that during the 2 World Wars, First Nations men jostled to go fight for Canada because it really, in many cases, they wanted to prove themselves as Canadians. From, again, what I've been told, most of them were welcomed by their fellow soldiers. They were treated well. But that, of course, changed when they returned home, sadly. Now, William Isnardy on the left, he was killed in the First World War. There's a telegram that basically announces the death to the family. The body was buried in France. And the medal, which is about yay big, and it's bronze, is called the British Empire Memorial Medal, nicknamed the Dead Man's Penny. And this was embossed with the name of the deceased. So until including the First World War, of the wars in which men and women from the British Empire participated, India, Southeast Asia, Boer War, etc., First World War, any man or woman who died in the service of the empire, basically their family would receive this, and along the edge it's engraved with their name, the date of death, and their battalion. And so I have found numerous grave markers, gravestones of families who do not have the body, but they encase it in the tombstone. But what I found in the last few years is that grave robbers are starting to steal these. It's disgusting, right? Yeah, go away. So here we are. And that photo is, I think, right over there. And it's Mike Isnardy. He's in a wheelchair here, had a severe accident on the ranch. Ranching remains a dangerous business, right? It's full of danger. And this is some of his apparati and I spotted his this saddle here. These were taken about 10 years ago in this place. And what's interesting is that this piece here, there's a similar one in the Clinton Museum, and this is a Mexican item. This is a Mexican design. And that's how I found out that there are many Mexican families that came up from the south with cattle drives or wanting to work up here. And they were, well, for example, Cataline, who we're going to hear about later on, he employed a lot of Mexicans for his pack train. And then the Valenzuelas, the Garcias, etc., they all intermarried, right? So this is how you find out about these things. Now, my second family is Patenaude. So here we are, Joseph Philippe Patenaude, and he's from La Chute in Quebec, just right beside Montreal. Now you take a look at this family in the fur-collared 1920s, the cloche hat, the coat, the car. This is a European family. Okay, you can tell that right away. And he's a justice of the peace, so no wonder there's a car, right? And he's Joseph Philippe, so that's JP, and he was also justice of the peace, so he called himself JP. So while I was driving in Williams Lake, I noticed that I was driving on Patenaude Street, and that's how I found out, and Patenaude. And he arrived a little bit later in the Caribou, 1892, and he established the Wood Jam Ranch and the 153-mile ranch, where we're going to go tomorrow, right? So just south of here. And he married Christina Catherine Anderson, an Anglophone from Ontario, and they had 6 children. And his second wife, very often there's a second wife, Maria Henriette Bradshaw, presumably bilingual, from Quebec, and they had 1 son. So this is one family that did not visibly mix First Nations blood in its line, but Roger Patenaude, the son, the grandson, has told me, and he's out of town at a funeral right now. He said if there's a family in the Caribou that thinks they don't have native blood, they have to think about that again. You know, that's just the nature of that beast. And he was great to have, along with Allison. These are photos I took during my first trip around. And I'm not going to talk too much about the photo at the bottom, the general store, that you are going to be gobsmacked about when we go there tomorrow. It's got a story of its own. But this is, in all of the provinces, this is the largest assemblage. There's about 20 still operational buildings of the period. It's the largest assemblage of heritage ranching buildings in the province. It's spectacular. Now, Rusty Patenaude, there's Roger standing and Rusty sitting. He played for the Edmonton Oilers, right? We have really amazing hockey players in this industry and in this area. He's seated there because he can no longer walk. The sport basically did him in. All right. And he passed away just a couple of years ago, which I found out 2 days ago. And it was easy for me to go online and find some of his, and he's called Rusty because he had red hair, right? He was a ginger. And I got to do an oral history interview with the 2 of them. He was just so down to earth. So he was with the Oilers when it was WHA. when the NHL took over and then they built the new arena in Edmonton, the Oilers brought in their three top players to celebrate this. So Oilers, top player is Gretzky. Second, Messier. Third one, Rusty Patenaude. Okay? Top guy, top guy. So there we are in the living room of his smaller ranch. I don't know what's happening with that ranch right now. Good people, though. So their aunt was Branwen Patenaude, and we owe her six different volumes on the history of the caribou. She really knew her stuff, even though both Rusty and Roger say she was a little bossy. Okay? And then on the right is a very bad copy photo that I took downstairs here of Hope Patenaude, who, as it turns out, was the first operator of the Dominion government telegraph between Vancouver and Dawson City, a position he held for 47 years. So we owe communications in that area to this man and the others who formed that team. So that brings us closer and closer, right? These are the different fields that the descendants of these ranchers were really great in, right? Excelled in. So I got to interview another cousin, and his name is Jeff, as well as the lady on the right, and that is Ferris Romero. There she is with two of her sisters on the left, Seal and Marin, and her husband, Jason. And Jason and Ferris have won 2 Juno Awards. Like, this is the top musical award of the country. You can't get any better. And this is for traditional roots music. And they're also instrumental in maintaining the quality and the regularity of the Horsefly Music Festival as well, which is, again, just down the road. So again, just awesome interviews I had with these people. And again, national award. This is going to the top, right? And I'm thrilled to see these families, how they evolved and were able to do what they did and continue to do. The next family is Antoine Minnaberriet. That's a mouthful for French Canadians. It is very much a French name. I'd never seen it before. And he lives in southern France at the other end, and that's the Basque country, and he would have said he was Basque, probably more so than French, okay? And there was a major Basque community in Vancouver. It's kind of strange. Now, his first marriage was to La Star of the Pucais band, who was baptized Mary. And they had only one son, and that was Louis Globe. Even in French, that's just unheard of as a name. And he established the Basque Ranch in 1861, one of the earliest ranches in BC. So this is on the Thompson River. Let's see now. They did not speak French on the ranch. However, Globe learned the Nhlaka'pamux language from his maternal grandmother, who also taught him how to trap, to prepare hides, and make moccasins. So the Minnaberriets became a First Nations family, right? Métis, but they were accepted fully in and remained so with the Pucais band. So I spent 3 days with that family, and they were just awesome. But several years later, the lives of Globe and his mother were to change dramatically. In 1873, his father did what many colonizers in BC did, regardless of what country they came from or what language they spoke. He abandoned the Métis family to marry his real wife. And there she is, Marie-Agnès Mathilde Delattre, born in New York City of French parents. God knows how they met. The family does not know. And Louis Globe and La Star were sent to live on another of Minnaberriet's property, some 12 kilometers north of Basque Ranch. And Marie-Agnès moved into the ranch with their new husband, and they had 3 children. So Antoine did so well, he found gold on the Thompson on his property, so much so he hired a team to long-term dig up that gold, and he became extremely wealthy, so much so that he and the European family were able to move back to France into the family home in France, completely abandoning the other family. But before he left, he did 2 things that was unheard of back then. First of all, he invited Globe to go live with them at the ranch so that he could become accustomed to European ways. He said, you need to understand this. And then he registered him at the Coqualitza school in carpentry and in blacksmithing so that he could support his mother and his eventual family. All right. Interestingly enough, that's where he met the Guichon boys at the Coquitlam School. And that's how I found out that some white guys were also taking courses at some of the residential schools, though not necessarily living there, right? They might have been living outside the school. So even though Amedée inflicted this brutal abandonment on the first family, he at least, and the family does feel this way, made this honorable gesture. So when I talked to my contact, Daryl, he says, well, we don't think it's right, but he was a man of his time and ahead of his time because he did actually what he did. Right. So they go with the flow. And by the way, all of my families that I was able to speak to, each of them valued their Francophone heritage, even though some of them have not spoken the language for 3 generations. And all of them really value their First Nations roots if that's part of the family too. So that was lovely to hear. Now, descendants on the right, Percy Minnaberriet, who I had a couple of drinks with at the bar in Cache Creek. And he became a champion calf roper. And I understand he's been inducted into a Hall of Fame. I don't know if it's this one, but there he is on the right in 1952 at the P&E Rodeo. And his niece on the left, second from the left, so this is Verna Minnaberriet, BC Indian Princess. I had never heard of the BC Indian Princess contest, which was parallel to the Miss BC contest. All right, so that was a whole other, this was one of those get out of here moments, right? You have Miss Bonaparte here, and I can't read quite the other one. This is 1975, and as it turns out, and thank goodness for being able to research newspapers more easily now, that was the last year that pageant existed. So she was the last to wear this crown. And after that, and apparently at 67 already, we were seeing some young First Nations women carrying over into the more generic contest. But that was the last of that one. And I thought, well, so I thought, okay, how do I put myself into her shoes? She's the last one. What did this mean to her? Did it augment the feelings about herself as a First Nations young woman, etc.? Well, she got a doctorate in education. She remains a leader in her field, and she spent her life bettering opportunities and education for First Nations across the province. Bravo, Verna. Right? Descendant of the ranch. Our last family, I'm leaving time for questions here, is the Guichon. Oh, yes, sorry. Before we go there, Antoine was also one of numerous American men who, once installed in Canada, also passed themselves off as being of the nobility. He was Count Minnaberriet. All right. I haven't found that in print anywhere, but the Minnaberriets tell, as I said, we hear he was a count. Well, just like Versepuech, the patriarch of the Gaspard family as well. This is in Dog Creek. I haven't met any of the Versepuech yet because of COVID and because of other impediments. And everywhere you read about him, he's Count Isidore Versepuech de Gaspard. Well, Gaspard in France had 27 inhabitants. Okay, so when you are the Count, the Prince of Wales, Wales brings your fortune. Gaspard wasn't a fortune. So I've gone to the peerage experts in those areas. I've spoken with them, and in neither case are they counts. Okay, so I had the sad task of telling the Minnaberriets that I haven't gone to the Versepueches yet or the Gaspards. Most of the Versepuech descendants are now Gaspards because you tell your elementary school kid how to spell Versepuech, right? It's amazing when you think of these men. When they left, they were probably 3rd, 4th, 15th son, never going to inherit anything. Family was probably poor to start with. They were farmers over there, even though Versepuech's father was royal. Not attorney, the ones who write down birth notices and the whole bit. No, someone said notary, royal notary. All right, but that's all you did. You wrote down births, deaths, and marriages, right? There's not much money there, and the censuses say that they were farmers. So there was no title associated with that. They say he came in and traded with a First Nations chief his tricorn and very elaborate jacket from the court of Louis XVI for some horses. I want to see that jacket, first of all, if it even exists. It's a legend, I think, because they would not, if they had had that, they would have just bought it because that's what happened to royalty. You know, they pass on and that it was resold, et cetera, et cetera. So sadly, in neither one of these cases, even though leaving a society and a culture where they were really down at the bottom, they decided to put themselves at the top here, right? It must have opened some doors, but I'm bringing them back to what they were. So among the all right. So the Guichon. So there were four, or Guichon today. There were four brothers that came from Savoie. You can see the little red dot. That's right in the Alps, Olympic country. And one died here, one returned to get married over there and stayed there. So that left Laurent and Joseph. And let's see now. They married sisters Perron and Josephine Rey, R-E-Y, the daughters of Mamette Lake rancher François Rey, also from France. So Jolene and I were there 6 months ago, whatever, just northwest of Merritt. And it's Mammoth Lake, M-A-M-E-T-T-E, but I've seen it in maps as Mammoth, right? So, but no, it's Mamette. And I was able to find the land appropriation documents in the museum of at least 30 different, mostly French-Canadian men who then bought there or obtained land there to establish further ranches. So that's a whole other chapter in the upcoming book, right? So these two brothers set up the first Guichon ranch there at Mamette Lake, and then they very shortly closed it up because they had other things to do in life. All right. So we're going to talk about Joseph first. Laurent, the one in the center. So those of you who has anybody here gone to the Rifle Bird Sanctuary in Ladner? Okay, as you drive from Ladner, just south of the airport, right, to the sanctuary, the road gets narrow, and you're right on your right. You will have the berm that is the dike, right, and then on the left there's a little village. Well, that's what Laurent did. He built. Oh, first of all, he built a fabulous hotel in New Westminster, which is not here. We just literally found an image of it online, which is great. But then, like Vancouver burned in 1886, New Westminster burned in 1898. And who's walked in New Westminster? It's like this, right? So it went right up the hill, and it left two buildings on the main street, right? So he bought another, for his second hotel, he bought one of the nicer ones there, and Prime Minister Laurier, they all stayed there. But over and above that, then he went to this area because they befriended, of course, the Landers, and the Landers said, buy, even back then, right? And he built this very sturdy wharf. That's a train on the wharf, okay? There's his new hotel, and there's the general store. He also built a very solid boat building industry there. And why? Because the train was bringing lumber and products from all over the Lower Mainland, and even possibly as far as here. And it would go onto tall ships and steamships that would bring them to India, the British colonies across the ocean. All right. So this was a going concern, and it became known as Port Guichon. And when you're driving in that area, all the little posters on the thing, it still says Port Guichon, even though it's part of Lander, which is now part of Delta. So there's not much of Port Guichon left. There were no other really Francophones there. That is the family mansion on the left. It's absolutely gorgeous. You drive by it on the way there. I've never been able to get into it because they're closed. They're quite closed on themselves, both here and there. They are farmers, mostly potatoes. So between the ranchers in the Thompson, Nicola area, they call themselves the meat Guichons and the potato Guichons, right? Um, so they did really well. And until the church was built there, this became sort of like a Catholic community. There were Croatians, among others, all Catholic. And Mass was said for at least 10 years in the living room of that house. Now, Joseph and Josephine were very sociable, so Mamet Lake was not sufficient for their needs, and they built the Quilchena Hotel at Quilchena, just east of Merritt, which was supposed to become the major town in that area, and it never happened. But I had the opportunity of being toured through there by Guy Rose and his wife, who just to the left had the major ranch there and owned the hotel. And you could still see a couple of bullet holes in the bar, but it was a very shishi establishment, okay? Very hoity-toity. It's been bought along, no, not with a ranch. They've been sold, but to a young family who are going to be trying to make a go of it. It's not the Douglas Lake, thank you, company, which is like literally to the left here, right? Just to the left. So the Guichon Hotel is closed, but if you want the coolest place to hold a wedding, you can rent the building out for a weekend. There's 25 bedrooms, a great space. The restaurant's still there, the bar's still there. Wouldn't that be a hoot? Just a great place. So they did well as well. So one of the Guichon children, Lawrence Peter, he was ahead of his time in establishing, great, amazing pasture management practices. It was the first, and that earned him the first honorary doctorate in agricultural sciences, created specifically for him by UBC. So here he is in 1953, receiving it at the same graduation ceremony as one of his grandchildren, Guy Rose. So his mother was a Guichon, and it was Guy who and his wife Hilda who were my contacts with the Guichon family, and he still spoke to me in French. All right. So this is a family that chose to remain European, and so this would have been 10 years ago, let's say. I met them twice, and Guy passed away just a couple of years ago as well, 3 years ago. But very open, very interesting guy. Now, again, one of the family, Gerard Guichon, I should have his photo here. He was posthumously awarded the Order of Canada in 1982 for the establishment of ranchers associations and rodeos around the province as well. So you see, we're getting provincially recognized and then nationally recognized. And then, of course, Gerald married an Anglophone Quebecoise, and her name was Judith Ray, or A.Y., and she and Gerald introduced a holistic method of ranching management. And due to her personal accomplishments, she was invited to be the Lieutenant Governor of British Columbia, a position she held from 2012 to 2018. And I had the honor and the pleasure of receiving her. We did, right? Every year during that period. She had history in her heart, and I was responsible for the Lieutenant Governor's Historical Writing Awards. And she was there every year to give that medal, right? That's not been the case since her, but we're hoping the next one will come back to what should be, right? So thank you, Madame Guichon. Let's see now. So you'll have noted that in some of these families, you can easily trace the Métis lineage. These are my Minnaberriets in Spence's Bridge with some of the family treasures. And he was a gentleman who very genuinely said, well, my great-grandfather was a man of his time, right? Now, French names persist throughout the landscape. 15 years I've been pulling them together. I have over 300 names from streets to mountains, and I'm still doing it. I've just found a couple more. Le Bourdet Street in Clinton, right? There's Le Bourdet Park up in Quesnel, right? And Quesnel itself, Jules Quesnel, right? And then we were at this conference last year at Chilliwack, and we had this incredible speaker, Sonny, who prefers to be known just by his first name, says, I'm Sonny with a Stolo, and he was speaking to us in a remarkable fashion about First Nations place names. And as I'm listening to that, I'm thinking, oh my God, what I've been doing for 15 years has been a colonialist task, right? Because the names I've been collecting replace those names to be replaced by English names, right? Right. So I thought, oh my gosh, that's sometimes, even though you're in that mindset, you need a kick in the pants to just make you realize to go further in that, right? So thank you, Sunny. Now, some of the families chose to mitigate their mixed origins over several generations, but assumed the richness of their diversity when social evolution encouraged them to do so. Now, this is one that was very European, and we have Gertrude Guichon née Bilodeau. That's not a costume she's wearing. She was branding, she was haying. This is what you did, right? And then on the weekend, you get dressed up in your 1920s duds and you'd go hunting as gentlewomen, you know? They had a polo team, right? That sort of thing, right? So the two realities there. Great photos from the BC archives. And who wants to go to that fabulous barn dance, right? I love the photo. And there's our Jimmy Isnardy playing the guitar. He's our fiddler, right? And I was presenting at the Royal BC, and this guy comes and speaks to me afterwards. He says, I'm Italian. And he says, I want to do exactly that, what you're doing, but on the Italian ranchers. And I thought, yeah, I have come across a couple of Patenaudes and etc. And he says, the guy on the left, he's Italian, but he anglicized his name. So he said, you found this photo. I didn't know this photo. So I'm going to help him out with the Italian connections of the Italian Center. And so it goes. So it goes, right? Sharing information expands the richness of the experience. Now, and here's Count Versepuech and Mutla, his wife, of the local First Nation. And there's two children missing here. The only daughter, and I look at her, she looks almost Asian to me. And interestingly enough, women if they were going to be educated, very often ended up at the Sisters of St. Anne convent in New Westminster, or even as far as Victoria, right? He sent her to France to be educated. That would have been a first. Years of education. Then she came back to Horsefly to get married and start a family. So I got to find out more about her. This is my last photo, and I took at the Basque Ranch. And some of the families I researched, and I hope you're going to go online to see them. Some have gone as far as the North Pole and abroad as well. Some introduced new breeds of cattle and new plant cultivars, while other descendants seized other opportunities to succeed, as we saw. We find the descendants around the world. Some have lived impassioned lives, while others remain at the height of their happiness, and I have lived this with them while peacefully rocking on the veranda of their ranch house. Thank you very much.